When Scott Morrison earlier ruled out nuclear power, saying if it didn't have bipartisan support, there would be no way he'd take up the fight, to be honest, I thought it was a bit of a cop-out. Because let's face it, almost nothing worth doing in politics starts with support from the Labor Party. There wasn't bipartisan support for stopping the boats, but the coalition did it anyway. And there certainly wasn't bipartisan support for the Western Sydney airport, but it's now finally happening after 50 years of procrastination. Most things only get bipartisan support after they've been shown to work. You know that old adage, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. The challenge here for a political leader is to pick the issues you want to fight on and then to get the timing right. And often the things that matter most are those you just have to run on with almost no other support. It comes down to you being able to lead the debate and hoping others will follow. Gun control under John Howard, the GST there as well, all of them as relevant in this debate as border protection. Scott Morrison is nothing if not a canny political operator. So when he said he wouldn't end the ban on nuclear power without bipartisan support, it was more likely his way perhaps of saying not yet rather than never, or at least that's what I was hoping he was saying. And if reports in the media today are right, it could well be the case that the coalition is finally edging towards taking a stand here and reversing a Howard government ban that was only put in place back in 1998 as a sop to the Greens to get a new operating mandate for Sydney's Lucas Heights nuclear reactor. According to the Australian newspaper, Cabinet ministers have been discussing reform to Australia's nuclear prohibition with a view to taking a new position to the election. Now, if that's true, it's about the most positive thing that any government could do to set Australia up for the future, both in economic terms, given how central energy is to our prosperity, but also in terms of our national security, given that we are more and more being pushed at a global level away from using our fossil fuels, all the while exporting them to our competitors. To go forward on nuclear, here's some ideas on how it could be done. The government would, of course, have to tell voters that if re-elected, it would end the ban on nuclear power. To take it to an election would give the government an absolutely clear mandate that no senator could refuse, given the Senate's almost certainly likely to contain skittish and populist crossbenchers. A clear commitment on nuclear power would give the coalition something to fight for in the next election. It would set the terms of the contest rather than let the opposition define them by default. And if the left wants climate change to be front and centre, this is a position that both addresses emissions and gives Australia secure baseload power now and into the future. It'd be a sign too that the government is finally getting serious about a military response to China. The argument, as you know, against nuclear-powered submarines is that we don't have a nuclear industry in this country, so we're stuck with conventional subs, even though there's no off-the-shelf option, and the French subs deal looks more and more delayed and expensive by the day. So if we were to develop a nuclear power sector here in Australia, we could have the submarines that could rapidly get where they needed to and launch the kind of missiles that any adversary would have to fear. Now, it can be taken for granted that Labor would ferociously oppose ending the nuclear ban, and it would rerun the sort of scare tactics we saw in 2007 when every coalition candidate was asked to rule out a nuclear plant in their electorate. But the trouble with scare campaigns is that they eventually don't scare people anymore. We've had 15 years to think about nuclear power. Indeed, a 2019 poll found support for developing a nuclear industry in Australia up 16% from 2011 to 51%. Opposition down 24% in that time. Why not have an Australian nuclear industry, power industry, and perhaps even nuclear submarines? There are now small modular nuclear plants about the size of a tennis court. How can they be so dangerous when the medical nuclear reactor in the southern suburbs of Sydney has been operating now without a hitch for more than 60 years? And how hard is it to do when the Lucas Heights reactor was taken from conception to completion in just 5 years. Just like we can export coal but no longer use it, it's always seemed pretty crazy that we could export uranium but not use it ourselves. We've got around 34% of the world's uranium reserves. We're the third biggest exporter of it in the world and have been there for years. Indeed, our current uranium exports are more than enough to generate the power we need in this country. So it's more than high time, isn't it, to have a debate, to treat the Australian public as adults capable of making an informed choice on the big issues facing our country. Bring the left out into the open. Bring the left out and force them to try and defend their opposition. I mean, how can you be against nuclear power if you really say you want lower emissions? To win the next election, to win a historic fourth term, the government needs to offer more than just vote for us, we're better than the alternative. Tackling an issue like nuclear power would expose the lies of the left and give the coalition's traditional base something real to fight for. I just hope the Liberals in Canberra are up for it. From what we know now, I reckon plenty of the Nationals certainly are.